We're going to be looking at a case today that really is one of the most tragic and divisive in modern Australian history.
It's a story that, for decades, really tested the country's entire legal system.
Absolutely. The faith in forensic science, the media's role, public prejudice, it's all there.
And it starts with an almost unbelievable claim. A 9-week-old baby vanishes from a tent in the Australian outback.
We're talking, of course, about the disappearance of Azaria Chamberlain in 1980. Our sources really chronicle this agonizing story, which all began during a family camping trip to Uluru.
Which was famously known as Ayers Rock back then.
Right. And the initial story from the parents, Lindy and Michael Chamberlain, was, on the face of it, quite simple.
Very simple. They said that on the evening of August 17th, 1980, their daughter Azaria was taken from their tent by a dingo.
But that simple, tragic story quickly spiraled into something else entirely.
It became a story of suspicion and then a massive public spectacle.
And it led to this unbelievable legal outcome. Lindy Chamberlain was convicted of murder. Her husband, Michael, was convicted as an accessory.
And she spent years in prison before a complete chance discovery just shattered the whole case against her.
So our job here is to really analyze how that happened. We're going to use the sources to dissect the legal arguments, the evidence.
Especially the circumstantial evidence, which, as we'll see, was later completely debunked. But at the time, it was enough for a murder conviction.
It's just a devastating story about how legal process, flawed science, and, public opinion can collide.
It really is.
And as we go through this, we have to be clear. We need to maintain a tone of respect and sympathy for Azaria, whose life was cut so short, and for her family, who went through an ordeal that is just, well, it's almost unimaginable.
Decades of legal battles, public scorn, and all on top of losing a child.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's ground ourselves at Uluru on that night, August 17th, 1980.
Okay. So the family's camping. Azaria is just 9.5 weeks old, and then she disappears.
And the immediate claim is an animal attack. What was the reaction right there at the campsite?
Well, it was mixed. Some other campers did say they saw dingoes that night, and dingoes were definitely a known presence in the area.
But the idea of one going into a tent and taking a baby?
That was met with a lot of skepticism. Not just from the public later on, but even from some of the authorities at the time. Dingoes were seen more as scavengers, maybe a bit shy.
Not as brazen predators.
Exactly. The sheer boldness of the act made the story very hard for many people to accept, even though the Chamberlains were obviously in a state of alarm.
And that skepticism, that's what triggers the first official investigation, the coronial inquest.
That's right.
For listeners who might not be familiar with the Australian system, what exactly is a coronial inquest?
It's a judicial inquiry. Its purpose isn't to determine guilt, like a trial. It's really a fact-finding mission.
So to establish identity, cause of death, that sort of thing?
Precisely. To find out who died and when, where, and how. This first one opened in Alice Springs in December of 1980.
And there was something about this inquest that immediately made it different. It elevated it, you could say.
It certainly did. Our sources point out that this was the very first time in Australian legal history that court proceedings were broadcast live on television.
Wow. So from day one, this wasn't just a local tragedy.
No, it was a national obsession playing out in everyone's living rooms. The media scrutiny was immediate and incredibly intense.
Initially, though, the magistrate, a man named Dennis Barrett, his ruling seemed to support the Chamberlain story, didn't it?
It did. His finding, which came in February 1981, was that the likely cause of death was, in fact, a dingo attack. He accepted their account.
That must have been a huge relief for them.
A moment of temporary vindication, absolutely. But the ruling wasn't as clean as it sounds. There was a catch.
Ambiguity.
A very significant and ultimately damaging ambiguity. Barrett concluded that a dingo attack was the cause, but then he added this phrase.
What was it?
He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that after the attack, the body of Azaria was taken from the possession of the dingo and disposed of by an unknown method, by a person or persons, name unknown.
So he's saying a dingo started it, but a human finished it.
Essentially, yes. He was suggesting some kind of human intervention after the fact.
And why would he conclude that? Just because the body was never found?
That's exactly it. Because the body was missing and only some blood-stained clothing was found kilometers away, he felt he couldn't just leave it at that.
But by adding that line, he basically leaves this cloud of suspicion hanging right over the parents.
He absolutely does. He kept the door wide open for the prosecution because the Chamberlains were the only adults who could have been that person or persons unknown.
And that ambiguity was all the Northern Territory police needed, wasn't it?
It was. They were not satisfied with that finding at all. They really believed the Dingo story was a cover-up.
So they pushed for more.
They pushed hard, and that pressure led directly to a second inquest. This one was held in Darwin in September 1981.
And the move to Darwin, that suggests a shift, doesn't it? Away from the local community.
A huge shift, both geographically and in attitude. The second inquest was much, much more skeptical.
So what changed? What happened at this second inquest that turned the investigation so squarely against the Chamberlains?
The police came with what they called new forensic evidence. Evidence gathered in the months between the two inquests that they claimed completely contradicted the Dingo story.
And this is where the family car comes in, the yellow Holden Torana.
Yes. The car became the absolute focus, and the way it was handled was, almost theatrical.
How so?
The car was seized from where the Chamberlains were living in Queensland, and it wasn't just driven back. It was flown by a military aircraft to Alice Springs for analysis.
Flying a family car in a military plane, that sends a very powerful message to the public, doesn't it?
A massive message. It suggests that the authorities believe this car holds the secret to a terrible crime. It created this sense of gravity, this sense of impending revelation.
And based on the forensic findings they presented at that second inquest, the ones related to the car and the baby's clothing,
the magistrate concluded there was enough evidence to formally charge Lindy and Michael Chamberlain.
it's just a shocking turnaround. In less than a year, they go from grieving parents whose story is officially accepted to being charged with the murder of their own child.
It was the formal beginning of their nightmare. Lindy was charged with murder. Michael was charged with being an accessory after the fact. The authorities had now fully rejected the Dingo story.
And we're pursuing this theory of a human killing and an elaborate cover-up.
That's right.
So let's get into the trial itself. The prosecution's case, it had to be incredibly persuasive because they had no body, no weapon, and they had eyewitnesses who supported the Dingo story.
It did. And the narrative they constructed was, it was chilling. And it relied heavily on painting Lindy as this cold, calculating, and unemotional killer.
So what was their version of events? The reconstruction of the crime they presented to the jury?
The Crown alleged that Lindy had taken Azaria from the tent, gone to the front seat of their Holden Torana, and deliberately cut the baby's throat.
Not an accident, not an act of passion, but a deliberate cut.
Yes, a specific action implying intent and, premeditation.
And what about the minutes immediately after? How did she supposedly hide what she'd done before raising the alarm?
Well, the theory was that she immediately hid the baby's body inside a large camera case that was in the car.
A camera case.
A large one, yes. And then, allegedly, she took the case back towards the camp. And the timeline here is just critical. They claim she did all this, cleaned up, hid the body, and then rejoined the other campers, acting completely normally.
And this is where that strange detail about the baked beans comes in.
It is. The sources mention this. The prosecution pointed out that she was seen feeding one of her other sons a can of baked beans after the alleged murder was committed.
And that was used to paint a picture of her as, a sociopath? Someone with an unnatural level of composure.
Exactly. Someone who could commit this horrific act and then just switch back into routine mothering mode without missing a beat.
And what did the prosecution say happened to the body in the end?
They alleged that she disposed of the body later, while everyone else, including Michael, was out searching the bush for Azaria.
So she used the chaos of the search as a cover.
That was the theory. That she covertly buried or hid the body somewhere it would never be found. The entire narrative painted a picture of, almost inhuman levels of deception.
Now, for a jury to buy into this incredibly dark theory, the prosecution needed some kind of killer evidence. Forensic evidence that seemed irrefutable.
They did. And they presented what they framed as 3 interconnected pillars of forensic proof.
Okay, what was the first?
The first centered on Azaria's clothing. Specifically the jumpsuit, which had been found about a week after she disappeared, roughly 4 kilometers from the tent.
Right, and the analysis of the damage to that jumpsuit came down to one key expert.
A man named James Cameron, a forensic expert from the London Hospital Medical College. And his testimony was, at the time, incredibly difficult for the defense to counter.
What did he claim?
He alleged that the damage around the jumpsuit's neck was not from an animal tearing or chewing. He said it was an incised wound.
A clean cut.
A clean cut, indicating a blade. A human with a knife.
Did he offer any other proof to tie Lindy to the act?
He did, and this was incredibly powerful for the jury. He claimed that when you looked at the jumpsuit under specialized ultraviolet light,
Yes.
you could see the faint imprint of a small adult hand.
A handprint on the jumpsuit.
Yes, and it was presented as the hand of the person who held the baby while cutting her throat. It was a very powerful, very emotional piece of proof for the jury to see.
Okay, so that's the first pillar. The jumpsuit. What was the second?
The second was arguably the centerpiece of the whole case. It was the chemical analysis of stains found inside the car.
This is the fetal hemoglobin claim.
Exactly. Fetal hemoglobin is a type of blood found in infants up to about 6 months old. Azaria was 9.5 weeks.
So if they found that in the car.
It would be catastrophic for the Chamberlains. And the prosecution presented a report claiming they had found fetal hemoglobin in stains on the front passenger seat of the Tirana.
Why was that so damning? What did it prove?
It proved two things in the prosecution's view. One, that the baby was in the car and had bled significantly, which completely contradicted the Dingo story. And two, that the bleeding must have come from a clean wound, not the tearing you'd expect from an animal.
It scientifically linked the crime to the car.
And by extension, to Lindy. It was presented as objective, irrefutable science.
So we have the jumpsuit and the blood in the car. What was the third pillar?
The third wasn't really forensic. It was more about using small inconsistencies in Lindy's own testimony to make her seem dishonest.
How about the clothing again?
Yes. Lindy always insisted Azaria was wearing a little matinee jacket over the jumpsuit, but when the jumpsuit was found, the jacket was missing.
And the prosecution used that.
Oh, yes. They suggested she was lying. Perhaps the jacket had damage on it that didn't fit her story, or maybe it was just to show she was an unreliable witness.
And there was another detail, a very small detail, about a singlet.
The inside-out singlet, it sounds almost absurd now, but it was used against her. The baby's singlet, which was found inside the jumpsuit, was on inside out.
How is that evidence of anything?
Well, Lindy had said she was most particular about how she dressed her babies. So the prosecution argued this meant something was wrong. That she was in a hurry, perhaps distracted because she'd just committed murder, or that the baby was dressed hastily.
Just tiny little details twisted to create a picture of suspicion.
Exactly. It all fed the narrative that she was hiding something, that her story wasn't adding up.
So the prosecution's case really was built on this combination of what seemed like hard science and these circumstantial details that played on public prejudice against a mother who didn't seem to grieve in the way people expected.
That's it precisely. The jury was already primed by the media to see her as cold and unusual. The forensic evidence was just presented as the objective proof to justify that suspicion.
But the defense did fight back. Despite how powerful this case seemed, they mounted a substantial counterargument. Let's start with the eyewitnesses.
The defense brought forward a number of people, fellow campers, who testified they had seen dingoes in the area that night.
And not just seen them, but seen them acting strangely.
Yes, acting boldly, aggressively. These weren't friends of the Chamberlains. They were independent witnesses. And crucially, they all stated they believed the Chamberlain story from the start.
And there was also a direct challenge to the prosecution's timeline.
A huge one. The defense had a nurse who testified she heard a baby's cry after the time the prosecution claimed Azaria had already been murdered and hidden away.
So if a baby was crying after the alleged murder...
Then the prosecution's entire, carefully constructed timeline falls apart.
So that's the human element. But the real battle was over the science, wasn't it? They had to dismantle that fetal hemoglobin evidence.
That was the key. They had to show that the scientific certainty was anything but certain, and they did this by attacking the methodology of the test itself.
How so?
They presented evidence showing that the test used wasn't actually specific to fetal hemoglobin. It was prone to false positives.
Meaning other substances could trigger it.
Many other substances. They argued the car was a family car. It had kids in it. Things get spilled.
Like what? What could give a false positive?
Well, things like adult blood, say from a child's scraped knee, or even other organic compounds like nasal mucus.
And the most famous example?
The chocolate milkshake. They argued that things like spilled milkshakes, which were definitely present in a family car, could react with the test chemicals and produce a result that looked like a positive for blood.
So the irrefutable evidence could have just been a milkshake stain.
It could have been. It completely undermined the certainty of the prosecution's biggest claim.
And what about the dingo evidence? The defense had an expert on that too.
Yes, an engineer named Les Harris, who had done a lot of research on dingoes. He directly challenged James Cameron's incised wound theory.
What was his argument?
Harris testified that a dingo's teeth, specifically their carnassial teeth, are like shears. They're designed for cutting through tough material. He said they're strong enough to cut through a car seat belt.
So they could easily have made a clean cut on a baby's jumpsuit.
Absolutely. It completely contradicted the idea that only a human with a knife could have caused that damage.
He also had an explanation for how the clothes could have been left in the state they were found.
He did. He talked about observing a captive dingo that could unwrap meat from paper, eat the meat, and leave the paper mostly intact. It showed their dexterity.
Which would explain how the jumpsuit could be found in one piece, with the jacket missing.
Exactly. It showed that the state of the clothes was perfectly consistent with an animal attack, not a human one.
And yet, despite all of this, the jury
rejected it. On October 29, 1982, Lindy Chamberlain was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison.
And Michael
Michael was convicted as an accessory after the fact. He was given an 18-month suspended sentence. The jury believed he helped her cover it up.
So they immediately launched appeals.
They did. But the first appeals were unsuccessful. They appealed to the federal court in 1983, and that failed.
And then they went to the highest court in the country.
To the High Court of Australia in 1984. They argued the verdict was unsafe, given all the conflicting evidence. But the High Court refused the appeal.
But it wasn't a unanimous decision, was it?
No, and this is crucial. It was a 3-2 majority. Two of the most senior judges in Australia dissented. They thought the conviction was wrong.
That must have been just agonizing, to get that close, to know that senior judges agreed with you, but to have your legal options exhausted.
It was. Lindy remained in prison, serving a life sentence based on evidence that was, at best, incredibly shaky.
So for years, that was it. Lindy was in prison. But her freedom didn't come from a legal breakthrough. It came from something completely random.
It is the most incredible twist of fate in this whole story. It really shows you how justice can sometimes hang by a thread of pure chance.
And it started with another tragedy at Uluru.
That's right. In 1986, a British tourist named David Brett fell to his death while climbing the rock.
So police began a search for his remains.
A difficult 8-day search in a very rugged area, and where they eventually found his body was critical.
Where was that?
It was at the base of a cliff, in an area that was just full of dingo layers. And as police were searching that area for Brett's remains,
They found something else.
they found Azaria's missing matinee jacket.
The one Lindy had insisted she was wearing all along.
The very one. Found 6 years after the trial, in an area frequented by dingoes, exactly corroborating Lindy's story.
The impact of that discovery must have been immediate.
It was seismic. It was the physical proof that her story was true. The chief minister of the Northern Territory had no choice. He ordered Lindy Chamberlain's immediate release from prison.
And that was the start of the formal exoneration process.
Yes. On September 15, 1988, the Court of Criminal Appeals officially and unanimously overturned all the convictions against both Lindy and Michael.
And this forced a major reevaluation of all that forensic science that had convicted them.
It did. The entire case was reexamined, and the so-called expert testimony were shown to be deeply flawed. The pivotal fetal hemoglobin tests were proven to be highly unreliable.
And there was a final damning revelation about the car, wasn't there?
There was. Investigators found that the sound deadener sprayed under the car's chassis during manufacturing.
The stuff used to reduce road noise.
Exactly. That substance produced virtually identical results when the same tests were run on it.
So the fetal hemoglobin...
It was very likely just a chemical reaction with the car's undercoating. The entire scientific basis for the murder conviction just evaporated.
An unbelievable injustice. And the compensation they eventually received didn't even come close to covering their costs.
No. They were awarded $1.3 million 2 years after they were exonerated. But our sources show that covered less than a third of their legal expenses fighting the system for a decade.
And even after all that, after the convictions were quashed, the official cause of Azaria's death was still up in the air.
It was. That old ambiguity was hard to get rid of. A third inquest was held in 1995. And even then, it resulted in an open finding. The coroner still couldn't or wouldn't definitively say what happened.
It took another 17 years for the final answer.
It did. A fourth inquest was held in 2012. And what spurred this one was a mountain of new evidence that had been collected over the intervening 30 years.
Evidence of what?
Evidence of other confirmed dingo attacks on humans. The world's understanding of dingo behavior had completely changed by then.
And what was the final ruling from that inquest?
On June 12, 2012, 32 years after Azaria disappeared, Coroner Elizabeth Morris delivered the definitive verdict. She ruled that Azaria Chamberlain died at Ayers Rock on 17 August 1980. The cause of her death was as a result of being attacked and taken by a dingo.
And with that, they were finally able to get an amended death certificate. Legal closure, 3 decades too late.
Finally.
Now, you can't talk about this case without talking about the media. Our sources are clear. This is one of the ultimate examples of a trial by media.
Oh, absolutely. The media basically convicted Lindy Chamberlain before she even set foot in the courtroom. The coverage was so intense, so biased, that it created an atmosphere where a fair trial was almost impossible.
And so much of it was directed at Lindy personally. The public developed this really negative fixation on her. Why?
Because she didn't act the way people thought a grieving mother should act. She wasn't hysterical in public. She was composed, sometimes stoic. And people interpreted that composure as coldness, as guilt.
She was judged for her personality, not the evidence.
Completely. The public sphere was just filled with what the sources call fanciful rumors and sickening jokes.
And their religion, the fact that they were Seventh-day Adventists, that was weaponized against them.
It was a shocking part of the prejudice. There were these wild, baseless rumors that their church was some kind of cult that sacrificed infants.
Which was completely untrue.
Utterly baseless, but it gave people a motive where the prosecution couldn't find one.
There was even that malicious rumor about Azaria's name.
Yes, an anonymous tip circulated that Azaria meant sacrifice in the wilderness. Again, totally false. It actually means helped by God.
It extended to the most trivial things, didn't it? Like the clothes she dressed the baby in.
People criticized her for dressing her baby in a black dress, and that was somehow twisted into evidence of dark intentions. It shows you how desperately people were looking for any reason to justify their suspicion.
But over the decades, that public perception did eventually change. And not because of a court ruling, but because of more dingo attacks.
Yes. The scientific and public understanding of dingoes has been completely rewritten since 1980. There have been so many documented attacks on humans, especially children.
The sources mention Kagari, or Fraser Island, as a key location for this.
It is. It's one of the last places for purebred dingoes, and there have been hundreds of documented incidents there. It proved that dingoes could be, and were, dangerous predators.
Was there one specific case that helped validate the Chamberlain story?
There was a well-known case in 1998 where a 13-month-old girl was attacked and dragged from a picnic blanket by a dingo. The father had to fight the animal to get his child back.
And that proved that a dingo was capable of exactly what Lindy had described.
Exactly. It was real-world validation of her testimony, decades later.
The cultural echo from this case is enormous. It went global.
It did. The phrase, "a dingo took my baby," became this sort of dark, satirical punchline in pop culture, especially in America.
It was in shows like Seinfeld and The Simpsons.
Yes, which shows how far the story traveled, even if it was often trivialized in a way that must have been incredibly painful for the family.
But there have been more serious dramatizations as well.
There have. The film Evil Angels, which was called A Cry in the Dark internationally, was a huge one. Meryl Streep was nominated for an Oscar for playing Lindy.
And there have been books, a miniseries, even an opera.
Right, Lindy. The story has become an indelible part of the Australian cultural landscape.
And the physical artifacts of this case are now preserved as part of the national story.
This part is truly remarkable. The National Museum of Australia has a huge collection, over 250 items related to the case.
What sort of things are in there?
It's incredibly poignant. They have the family's camping equipment, courtroom sketches, Azaria's black dress, and even the car.
The yellow Holden Tirana.
The very car that was the false centerpiece of the prosecution's case. And perhaps most powerfully, they have the number from Lindy Chamberlain's prison door.
Wow. And the National Library also has a massive archive.
Around 20,000 documents, letters from the public, legal papers, even Azaria's birth records.
Preserving the prison door number alongside the birth certificate, that's a profound statement about accountability.
It is. It turns the collection from just an archive of a crime into a monument to a wrongful conviction, a national mistake.
So looking back on all this case gives us some really critical lessons about the justice system. We've seen how unreliable forensic evidence can be given this catastrophic wait in court.
And we've seen the devastating effect of media prejudice, how public opinion can essentially convict someone before a trial even begins. The Chamberlain's path back to justice was so long, so difficult.
and that careful institutional preservation of this whole dark chapter, the prison door, the records, it really brings up a fascinating question for you, the listener, to think about.
It does. It forces us to ask, what is the responsibility of a society to archive the evidence of its own mistakes, like a wrongful conviction?
Is it a form of apology? Or something more?
Or is it a necessary warning? A permanent record to make sure future generations understand just how fragile justice can be and how spectacularly it can fail.
It's a powerful reminder that history has to include our failures just as much as our successes.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening.